At the conclusion of the course, I would like to share some possible interview questions. Now, obviously, these are not comprehensive and they do not cover all scenarios. The actual questions that you're going to get in your interview depend on a lot of factors. So, for example, it depends on the industry that your company works in, your roles and responsibilities, and the technology stack that your company is using, among others. But still, the questions do provide a flavor of the type of interview questions that you may receive. We'll start with security governance. So question number 1. If you join our organization, how would you improve our security? Now this is an open-ended question and there is no right or wrong answer to it. The interviewer is actually looking for how coherently your thoughts and your workflow is organized. You may be tempted to directly start naming security solutions and technologies. However, this is not the correct approach. So your first step should always be about understanding how the organization works, what are their assets, how are they organized, where are they located, and what is the priority of each asset. Do they have databases, do they have web servers, and so on. In the next step, you should understand their existing security posture, the current security controls that they have put in place, what type of firewalls they're using, what type of identity and access management they're using, and so on. So it is only after you have gained knowledge about their assets and about their current security postures, including the tools, technologies, and processes, would you be able to identify possible gaps and then propose recommendations. And then you can propose solutions to strengthen their identity and access management system, network infrastructure, their vulnerability management system, and so on. Question 2. What are your recommendations to strengthen the authentication process at our organization? You can address this question from 3 aspects: technology, people, and processes. So for technology, if the data that is being accessed is sensitive and there have been breaches in the past, you may want to explore turning on multi-factor authentication. You can also employ things like account lockout after a certain number of failed retries. You can enforce the selection of strong passwords and password rotation, and so on. In terms of people, you need to make sure that they are aware of IT security policies pertaining to authentication, and also awareness about common social engineering attacks which may lead to a compromise of their passwords. In terms of processes, this could include things like having a coherent account audit and review process, which can expose any shortcomings that you have or any possible problems. Question 3. Our organization has acquired a small company. Is there a quick way to allow them to authenticate to our network and services without a complete migration of our accounts? So Identity Federation is the perfect solution for these scenarios when you don't want to create redundant accounts for all the employees in that organization. So by establishing a proper trust channel between the two organizations and setting up Identity Federation, you can streamline this process. Network security. Question 4. Due to the current pandemic, some employees need to work from home. What would you suggest as a safe way for them to connect to the corporate network? Now, virtual private networks, also known as VPNs, are the perfect solution for these kind of scenarios. You should never allow remote employees to directly connect to your corporate backbone without any sort of encryption in place. So if you are using VPNs, they allow the encryption of end-to-end traffic, and the remote user connects to your corporate backbone as safely as if he's sitting inside your network. What is SSL TLS and why should we use it? So SSL stands for Secure Sockets Layer, which is a deprecated standard now, and we now have Transport Layer Security, which is the newer version of SSL. Now this provides encryption for the HTTP protocol, and this makes sure that HTTP protocol which used to transmit data in plain text doesn't do so. So they offer HTTPS, which is basically HTTP traffic encrypted by TLS at the transport layer. So what TLS actually does is that it offers a secure tunnel between the client and the server. Web application security. Question 6. What is the difference between an SQL injection and a blind SQL injection attack? So the primary difference between the two is that when you launch an SQL injection attack, you actually get to see the output of the malicious SQL queries that you execute on the backend database. So your query fetches the data from the backend database and you can actually see the output on your screen. In contrast, in blind SQL injection attacks, you don't get to see the actual output on the screen. However, you can use inference techniques such as time-based or Boolean-based blind SQL injection in order to infer information. Question 7. What is the best way to prevent an SQL injection attack? There are a number of ways in which you can handle SQL injection attacks. A nice way is to use prepared SQL statements. So the problem stems from the fact that previously we mix code and data. So your code is mixed with your SQL data and your query is crafted within your code. So that's where the problem comes from, and the attacker is able to inject code instead of your data, and that code creates the SQL query which is malicious. But if you separate the two, if you separate the code and the data using prepared SQL statements, for example, then you are able to deflect a lot of SQL injection attacks. You may be tempted to answer input sanitization. However, please remember that input sanitization is not considered a 100% safe solution, and there are always workarounds. So it's a much better approach to propose prepared SQL statements. Question 8. A vulnerability scan has revealed several vulnerabilities in our network infrastructure and our web applications. How would you prioritize the vulnerabilities? This is a very common scenario actually, and if you run a vulnerability scan, you may discover hundreds, even thousands of vulnerabilities, and it is obviously impossible to address all of them. So there are three factors that you definitely need to keep in mind when you want to prioritize vulnerabilities. So the first is that you should prioritize vulnerabilities which directly impact your business operations. Secondly, you should address vulnerabilities which also have a high likelihood of occurrence and being exploited. And thirdly, you should also consider the severity rating of the vulnerability based on the CVSS score. Malware. What is the safest way to restore a system after a malware infection? Well, the safest way to restore a system after a malware infection is to restore it from a trusted backup. It is the only way that you will be 100% sure that there is no malware infection present in that system. Question 10. If you detect a malicious executable file on our network, how would you add protection against it in our security tools? This is a common scenario. We often discover malicious files, especially executables. Now, one way is to add the name of that file to your antivirus, for instance. But that is not a good solution because if the file name changes, then it won't be effective. So the best way is to generate a hash of the executable file and then feed that hash as part of a blacklist in your antivirus tool. And with that, we have come to the end of our course. Thank you so much for taking our course, and I wish you the best of luck in your career.